Today we're going to go ahead and continue our series, Bon Appetit, and we've been looking at the recipes for our life. How many of you know God has recipes? He has plans, right? We don't get to come in here and invent the wheel. We don't come in here not having direction. God is a God of structure and plan. He has organization. He has people at different ranks. He has all these things that we can see in the church. And he says, hey, guess what? You get to come in my family, and there's more of that. But not in a bad way. Rather, God has a plan so that we don't continue to do things our own way. How many of you have done things your own way and it just doesn't work out? It's not the way we had hoped, right? We throw the dice at something in our life and then it explodes instead of growing. And so the problem is that we have often decided to do things our own way. But that's not what God wants for us. See, we've looked at appetites. How many of you have appetites? We all have appetites. But God said, hey, be careful now that there's a danger if you just go and are led by your appetites. There's a danger if all you do is led by your cravings and what you want. We can't let them drive us. And then we went over, hey, not only is there a recipe, guess what? You got to follow it. You got to pay attention to the directions. You got to select the right ingredients. We started with looking at, hey, you're supposed to select the right and perfect lamb. And you got to look at the list of ingredients. You got to be careful, and you got to chop them up the right way and prepare them the right way. And then after you prepare it, guess what? You get to eat it. You got to be ready for what God is serving, ready for where God is leading, and then you partake, then you eat, then you consume it. How many of you are ready to eat this morning? 3 of you. All right, we're getting somewhere. How many of you are ready to eat this morning? I came to eat this morning. I came to eat. God served it up this morning. When I began to date Wendy, I remember being invited to my first Thanksgiving with her family. And I'll be honest, at the very beginning, the very first time, I was pretty overwhelmed just by the number of people they fit in that house. Now, let me explain a little bit. My mother-in-law is one of 10 siblings. Okay, the youngest went to high school with Wendy and I. And then my mother-in-law, many of you have met, you know, she's older. I'm not going to tell her how old it is because she watches me Sunday afternoons and I don't want to get in trouble. But she's older. She's the oldest of the 10 siblings. So there's a lot of them. And we're looking at 3 to 4 generations at least that come together and meet for most holidays. And back then, we would all cram into Wendy's grandma's house that was built by Wendy's grandfather in Santa Fe. And let me tell you, you could tell at the time it's been, you know, like these little doorways and little rooms and stuff. And I was like, wow, how did you fit 10 kids back then? But we would pack it in, and that room got hot and sweaty. Like, you think you're hot and sweaty right now? Just wait 40 minutes. But it was like that in the living room, and we'd be there. And understand that because I'm so much younger than my siblings, oftentimes I grew up like an only child. It was like me and my mom for the longest time, and then my little sister, and then I have 2 older sisters. So I was around a lot of girls, but now I'm in this room, and there's over 50 people just in the living room, and it's loud, and people are talking. But here's the good thing about a lot of people at Thanksgiving. There's a lot of food. And so everyone would bring in their specialties, their different dishes. And so, but the interesting to me was this was my first time with traditional Thanksgiving. In my home, that wasn't a priority, the one I grew up in. In my home, we didn't really do anything traditional. It was the opposite. And so at Wendy's grandparents, we had turkey and stuffing, ham and mashed potatoes. Man, I'm already getting hungry. There was gravy, there was cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, all the Hawaiian rolls you could eat. They had all the traditional stuff. And then in addition to that, they had the New Mexican flavors in there, right? They had red and green enchiladas there. They had red chili for the mashed potatoes. And guess what else they had? Dirt dessert. Remember I told you guys about that a couple weeks ago. And that was the first time that I had seen anything like that. But as good as that spread was, I understand when you're single, male, how many of you enjoy single males getting invited to someone's house to eat? That was our highlight, right? We're like, who has the fellowship? All the single guys would show up with a bowl ready to go. That's the first time I saw anything like that, but it wasn't the most important thing. It wasn't the thing that stuck out to me. What I remember most was about Wendy's family gathering together. It was the conversations that I overheard, because I'm an observer by nature. I people watch everywhere I go, and so I'm there and I'm listening to what they're saying. I've never seen this many family members in one room before. Like, my dad's family's big, but we never all gathered together in a single place like that. And I'm watching them, and most of them are believers, and I'm hearing their connections going on. I'm seeing love and warmth, and understand this is all foreign stuff to me. I'm like, where's the fights? Right? Because I come from borrachos, I come from drinkers. And so at every family gathering, hey, someone's going to end up getting into it. And so I'm waiting for that to happen, but I don't see any of that. All I see is love and warmth, and they're sharing and expressing, and it's weird to me, and it's loud, and all these things. And it wasn't just limited to family. The crazy thing is the Montaños, they would invite in friends to these gatherings. People like me, I didn't realize I was the orphan at that time. Now I see it. And they're bringing people who don't have family, that don't have anywhere to go for the holidays, and they bring them into this giant Montaño clan Thanksgiving. And I'm watching, and I'm taking it in. And it's a beautiful thing to witness, the love and acceptance, but it only happens because you're invited to it. It's an invite to the table. See, the logical next step, when the stomach growls, remember I said, you think you sat on Chewbacca sometimes, that's how loud it's growling. When your stomach growls, when you have an appetite, after you decide where you're going to eat. Remember I said, husbands, the joys of when your wife says, I'm hungry, where do you want to eat? Your next 5 answers are wrong, no matter what. Remember I said that? You figure out where you're going to eat. You figure out what you're going to eat. After you've prepared and made the food, the next step is to set the table. It's to sit down and eat. And I'm going to ask you over and over and over, are you ready to eat? Are you ready to eat? And if the answer is yes, then we need to set the table. In my house, if you didn't help set the table, you got in trouble. Understand that at God's house, we're all required to help set the table. That we come in as new believers, and we're living off milk at that point, right? We're in the high chair at the end of the table. But eventually, just like a baby grows teeth, right? Those teeth are indicators that now it's time for meat. And so believers, that's what happens is we mature and we're ready to eat meat. But guess what? As soon as you mature to that level, it's now your job. Get out of the high chair, clean it off, and get it ready for the next person. You got to help set that table. We need to invite the guests, right? The house, I'm sorry, it's not Field of Dreams. Build it and they will come. It doesn't happen like that. Because most people don't see the relevance in church. They don't see the value. They see it as this archaic thing, or everybody in here wears their judgy pants. Where do our judgy pants go? Does anybody remember? Outside. No judgy pants in here. Remember that. Where do judgy pants go? Outside. And so we need to understand that as we're extending the invitation to people, we got to bring them in here. We have to sit them down at the table. We pull out their chair and we want to share a meal, and we have to do that both in our spiritual life and our communal life. And when we look at how Jesus did things, we see he uses a table. He uses the table throughout Scripture as a place to teach. He uses it to break bread and build relationships. He used the table as a place to fellowship and minister. And as Christians, how many of you know we're required to emulate Jesus? I mean, how can we call ourselves Christians if we don't do what Christ does? We're supposed to be using the tools that God has given us. Not just our talents, but tools. So we see Jesus uses the table, and so you and I, we are also supposed to utilize that very same table. Remember I said we're adopted into his family. The same way that Jesus, look at Luke 14, we see Jesus, he goes to have a meal at the Pharisees' house. And when they sit down, he notices they're battling each other. They're pushing each other away. They want the good seats, right? They want those places of honor. And he sees their pride and their attitudes. And so Jesus is like, no, that's the wrong attitude. You guys are focused on the wrong things. He sees their pride, and so he begins to correct them, and he begins to teach and share with them. He gives them the parable of the great banquet. And it says in Luke 14, verse 15. Now remember, I need your participation. I need your help. When one of those with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat of." Jesus replied, "A certain man was preparing a great and invited many. At the time of he sent his servant to tell those who had been, 'Come, for everything is now.'" Verse 18. "But they all alike began to make. The first said, 'I have just bought a field and I must and see it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I have just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm on to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I just got married, so I can't come.'" And I'm like, that's probably the one legit thing right there. I just got married. There's 2 things. One, the guy, like the little girl thinks about her wedding his whole life, and the guy thinks about the honeymoon his whole life. And so I can imagine that the guy don't want to miss his honeymoon, right? And on top of that, the first thing you don't want to do is upset her. And so you're like, okay, I'll stay with you, babe. So that's the legit one. Verse 21, it says, "The servant came and reported this to his master. Then the owner of became angry and ordered his servant," one more time, "Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame." "Sir," the servant said, what has been done, but there is still room." Verse 23. Then the master told his servant, "Out to the roads and the country lanes and," one more time, "compel them to come in so that my will be. I tell you, not one of those who were invited will get a taste of my banquet." It ends with a pow. And so they sit down to eat. And Jesus sees, first off, that they're sitting down in the wrong seats for the wrong reasons. He gives this lesson about who should be invited to God's table in his house. And the parable begins with the host sending out his servant to invite the guests. So here in our passage today, the very first point that I want us all to see is that we're supposed to extend an invitation to God's table. We're to go and invite people to his house. Our job, after we have prepared the meal, after we've gone and helped set the table, is to now give them the invitation to the banquet. We're to invite them to the meal that God has prepared, so that they can come and sit and eat, be nourished, be healed, grow healthy, so they can come and spend time with him and know him. How many of you here have ever had a surprise invitation somewhere? A couple of you. Now, sometimes it's out for a meal. Those are my favorites, just saying. Sometimes you get invited over to someone's house, or maybe you get invited to go somewhere fun, but how did that invitation make you feel in that moment? See, I remember getting a surprise invitation to a conference in Texas. It may not excite you. I'm a pastor. There's certain things that excite me that don't excite other people. And it was a Northern Texas pastors conference, a leadership conference. And I had been watching it online for years, and I really wanted to go there for several years, and a friend of mine was going, and he came up with an extra ticket. And he invited me, and so it was like me and this other group of pastors, and in fact, we went with Harvest, and we piled into the van with Pastor Jason Dickinson, and we all began to drive over together to Plano, Texas. And on the way there, we stopped at Blue Hole. How many of you been to Blue Hole? Right? It's there in Santa Rosa. So we get to Blue Hole, and pastors get a little crazy when they're alone together. And we're like, hey, let's get on Facebook Live. And we were doing a big push for youth missions. And so all of us start broadcasting Facebook Live. We're like, hey, if you hit this money goal, we'll jump in. And we all ended up jumping in. Now, the problem was it was October. And we jumped in, and you ever been like under really cold water? It takes your breath away, and you think for a moment, oh, I'm going to drown right here. And so we jumped in and right out, and we continued on to Texas. And when we got to Texas, I did one of my bucket list items, is I got to go bow fishing. Now, I don't know if you've ever been bow fishing, but it's a lot of fun. You go on pontoon boats at night, late at night, and they have spotlights everywhere. And you have a bow and arrow, but there's a line attached to your arrow so that when you shoot it and hit the fish, you can pull it back up or reel it back in. And so it's junk fish, so it's just for fun. And you don't know what junk fish are, it's like carp and those kind of fish that are not really edible, but they've kind of overtaken this lake, and so now they've created these excursions, and so a bunch of us pastors, we all pitched in and we went on these boat trips. Now, how many of you know that your pastor is not really a mountain man? I'm a city boy. I like shopping, I like good restaurants, I like to watch TV and sports, and I like all those kinds of things. I didn't grow up like Tracy. I think I'm a mountain man, I think of Tracy, right? Tracy loves to be in the mountains and and in my heart, like I think I am, like I watch all the Alaskan shows, I watch all the homesteader shows, and I'm like, man, I would love to live like that, but the truth is I'm just too lazy to live like that. I don't have that same skill set or drive to live in that way. But there are things that I like to do that kind of make me feel connected to that. One of them is this bow fishing. Now, I don't get out on a boat much, so I don't know like the good seats to sit in, especially when you're on the water at night. So everybody else kind of piles to the back. And I'm like, oh, there's open seats in the front. I want to see where we're going. Do you know what happens when you go on a fast boat in the water at night? You get drenched. And you're hit by wind, and that's where I was, and I was freezing my buns off, and I'm there and I'm shivering, but I was like, I'm not gonna act like I'm cold, I'm gonna be tough out here. And so all night we shot carp, and I was having lots of fun. Then we end up going to the conference, we pile back into the van, we drive back to New Mexico, and we're laughing and telling stories and sharing about the trip. Now guess what stories we shared about the trip? Not what we learned in the conference. Not the books that we picked up. They weren't tied to any of the message we heard. It wasn't about any of the training we received. It started with the invitation. It was the joy of a surprise invite to go and be with friends. It was an invitation to hang out and be with people. An invite to journey somewhere together. The great memory of that trip had nothing to do with the destination. It had everything to do with the sense of belonging as we journeyed there. And I look at this parable, and in verse 16, it says, a certain man was preparing a great banquet and invited many guests. He invited many guests. But even though a ton of invitations went out, there wasn't a lot of people who accepted. In that verse, we see God's heart. Understand that God is always trying to be revealed, right? Some religious people like to say, oh, we have the only truth. That's why you have to come to our church. That's not God's personality. His nature is to be seen. He wants people to know him. He wants to be heard. He wants his truth taught. And so we see his intention in here that he wants to invite every single person to his table. He wants everyone there. And we all just to communion. We all remember that Jesus during his last meal, remember I said, remember this part? Here we go back to that part, Luke 22:15. And he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you. That's his heart. That's his personality right there. He is eager. He is eager to eat with us. He is excited to spend time with us. He looks forward to having us come and sit at his table. And so he offers these invitations to you and me. He offers this open invitation to everyone. How many of you would open your house to everyone? Me either. But here God is, and he gives this open and inclusive invitation to all, and his hope is that we would say yes to it. His great hope is that people would accept it and come to his table. And he wants us to have the right appetites. And he prepares this great feast and sets this lavish table and invites us all to sit down with him. This is God's heart. We're his motivation. We have this open invitation, and now you and I, as his kids, as his adopted family, guess who now has that invitation in hand? See, I think about us and we're his ambassadors. That's heavy. Like people who don't know church, people who don't know God, they're looking at us and they're deciding, is God real? Is he worth following based on our behaviors outside of here? Based on how we talk to people, based on how we interact, based on how we think and behave. And we're not just his followers. We're his people. We're his family. And he's entrusted us with the keys to his house. It's a symbol of authority, right? My kids only get a copy when I can trust them with it. And God gives us this symbol of authority. Why? To invite others to his house, to bring other people to his table. But have we? Are we? Are we extending those invitations? Are we stewarding what we're entrusted with? Are we meeting his expectations? Are we offering invitations like he would? Are we inviting people over to our homes? So you thought I was going to say church. Are we inviting people into our homes? Are we inviting them into our hearts? Are we inviting them into our lives? And are we extending invitations to the church? See, are we trying to bring people to his table in our faith community? This is what our life groups is about. It's not some latest fad. The life groups is about an invitation to a smaller, more intimate table, less intimidating table, so that we can build relationship with people. Because maybe Sunday morning is too much, because they don't know if we're crazy. They don't know if we're hateful. But maybe their friend from work or someone they know invites them to a small group midweek. A lot less intimidating. But they only work if we invite to them. See, we need to think about the people who maybe feel like they don't belong somewhere. I came in, I didn't feel like I fit in that church when I first came. People would get up and move away from me. Because maybe I looked creepy. Maybe my countenance, my spirit was off, right? Maybe they came and sat by me and they could feel the anger on me. And they would get up and move. Guess how that made me feel? Not welcome. Not invited. Didn't make me really want to come back. That's why God said, I got to get the right Panther Martin for you. Panther Martin is a lure for trout. He's like, I'm going to put the Wendy spinner on there. Zzz. And that's how he kept me around long enough to speak to me. See, we have to think about people who feel marginalized, overlooked, excluded. So that means that you and I, we're going to have to be very intentional. We're going to have to make effort. We're going to have to make sure that we invite and make people feel included. So we'll need to extend the invitation. We need to show them where to sit, maybe pull out a chair, bring them to the table, sit down next to them, hang out with them, spend time with them. We're going to be present. Being present. It's not enough to invite. We have to bring people in to sit at the table and put an effort to spend time with them, being present at the table. Luke chapter 10, we see Jesus sends out his followers. He sends them out in pairs. He gives them instructions. He tells them things like, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. And then the disciples come back and they're happy. They're full of joy. They give reports. They say, man, even demons submit to Jesus' name. And then Jesus teaches about the Good Samaritan, about how we should have mercy and extend your grace. And then he begins to travel some more. And he comes to a village, Luke 10, verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said, verse 40. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha. And I'm always like, he's like, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered. You are worried and upset about many things. Verse 42. But few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. So Martha has Jesus coming. She opens up her house to Jesus. She shows this great heart. Her heart has hospitality. She extends it to him, but she is worried and distracted, it says, the whole time. She's pulled all over the place. She's taking care of the guests. She's making sure the food doesn't burn, right? That the glasses are filled and all those kind of things. She's so busy, she misses the point of her invitation. Do you hear me, church? She's so busy. Why even bother inviting? She's opened up her home to Jesus, but now has no time to spend with him. And then it gets worse. In front of everyone, she puts her sister on blast. Right, let me translate that for the older folks. She wants to expose her sister in front of company. Look at my sister, she's not helping. She asked Jesus, the guest, to intervene, to settle the argument. And she kind of puts Jesus on the spot. She says, Lord, don't you care? That's what Martha was focused on. That's what she's worried about. Understand that Jesus can be in our midst. He could be sitting at our table with us, and we're like, don't you care? Because I'm worried about this. And Jesus is where he's supposed to be, but we're not where we're supposed to be. See, she's worried about all the stuff to get done. She's worried about her sister who's not helping her. Church, he's talking about us, right? You get that, right? The work. She's worried about the work and the brethren who aren't helping. And because of that, because of her misaligned focus, it stops her from being present at the table with Jesus. She let the details of opening her home, of preparing and setting the table, divide her and her sister. It stops her from being with Jesus. And I thought about an invitation to someone's house. You ever received an invite to go to someone's house? And you're excited to go, and you look forward to visiting them, but when you get there, they're busy. See, I remember when Wendy and I got a certain invitation like that. And it's friends we hadn't seen in a while. And we went to their house. We were looking forward to dinner. We were looking forward to hanging out and visiting and catching up. But right after the meal, they were so worried about the cleanup. Like they got up, they left Wendy and I at the table, and they began to do the dishes and the pans. They were worried about how the house looked, and so they began to do instant cleanup. And Wendy and I just sat there awkwardly alone at their dinner table. And it made us feel like we're in the way. That we weren't guests. Versus recently, we went to dinner at a friend's house. And the meal was great. And the conversation after, even better. And everyone at that meal was present. They were engaged. We were sharing our hearts. We were talking about godly things, but also just fun things. And we played a board game together. Clue. Everyone was fellowshipping. And we look back at Martha, and she misses out on the one thing needed to being a great hostess, and that's spending time with and listening to your guest. There is no greater way to be a host than listening to your guest, especially when that guest is Jesus. You guys with me? One of you, one more time. You guys with me? If that person is asleep next to you, pinch him. Jesus goes on, and he tells her that actually your sister, actually Mary chose correctly. It's not her that's off, it's you. She's chosen right because she chose to be present. And there's a whole lot there. Like she was in a man's position according to their culture, that only a man could sit at a rabbi's feet and learn. So it was extra shocking to them. Understand that context. And so here's the little sister, and Jesus says she's exactly where she's supposed to be. She's present. She's engaged. She's attentive. She is not distracted. See, our call to extend the invitation to God's table, to invite people to Jesus, doesn't stop with the invitation. We have to be present at the table. We have to be present both physically and mentally. We have to prioritize these moments of engagement. We have to put connecting with people first, above all the work, above all the distractions. When we're together with people, put the phones away. Tune in. Listen to each other. Engage in a meaningful conversations. GK and I, we were talking about church hurt. You know why church hurt happens? Because people don't bother to talk. They don't bother to see each other's point of views. They don't bother to make space to listen and try to reach for some compromise. I'm going to this church. And then you go and mess up another church. We're called to connect, to be family, not like the ones we grew up in, like the one Jesus models. And this is what he does. Jesus sits with people. He spends time with people. He opens doors into people's lives, and he uses those doors to help them. He uses those doors to heal them. He uses the doors to speak life into them. And we're called to invite people to God's table, to be present at the table and make sure there's room at the table. And the last thing is we need to always make sure that we make room at God's table. That everyone feels welcome and invited, and that they have a seat at the table, that they're provided for. They feel welcome, that there's enough food for everyone. Understand that Christians, as we mature, we're setting the table for the next group, for the next babies, the next believers. And so we got to make sure that we're on top of our customer service game. We have to make sure that we're pulling out the chairs, that we're setting a clean plate, that we're offering the best cuts to our guests. Matthew 25, you read the parable of the sheep and the goats. And Jesus is telling his disciples that when he comes back, how many of you know Jesus is coming back? I hope it's sooner rather than later. It looks like it, right? It's getting ugly out there. It's okay, Jesus is still on the throne. But when he comes back as king and judge, he says, I'm going to separate the sheep from the goats. I'm going to set aside two groups, and the first are going to be welcome into his kingdom. And the second, the goats, the unrighteous, will be sent away from Jesus to eternal fire and condemned for not serving those in need. Look what Jesus tells them in Matthew 25, verse 35. He said, for I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. 37. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? Verse 39. When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply. Jesus replies, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. In that portion of the parable, Jesus is emphasizing that it's important for us to care for others. But that doesn't mean a free-for-all. We cannot care for others if we're not prepared for it. We cannot open the floodgates, we cannot open our front doors if we're not prepared, if we can't keep our church safe, if we can't keep the kids safe, if we can't control our restrooms, if we can't control who comes in and out of church. We cannot afford to keep our doors open. So where's the balance? How do we reach the least of these? How do we answer God's call without opening the front doors wide? That's where we come back to systems and structures. That Jesus divided people into numbers. That there was a monetary control system. Understand that as we follow God's call, we follow the way that Jesus did it. He did not willy-nilly scatter seed. Why? He warns about where some seed falls, right? We are called to plant seed, not throw away seed. We are called to nurture seed, not waste seed. And that includes our invitation to understand that we are offering the bread of life. So we don't just throw it in the street. We have to control its distribution. We seek God. God, what is our plan? God, God, if we only have 12 loaves, God, where do we need to focus? And that's how we conduct ourselves. It's not accidental. The gospel is never accidental. God has always had a plan. And he's always used men and women to execute his plan. So you can't do it by yourself. There's a recipe for reaching the least of these. There's a plan of how we care for others that are in need. He's communicating that there's a connection between helping other people and serve him. Now, the reason we cannot just have our doors wide open to anybody is because not everyone will come and support the ministry. Not everyone that comes in those doors are looking for the gospel. Oftentimes they're just looking for free food. And we give as we are able. As we are able. That means we take care of the resource. We are stewarding what God has put together. You guys hear me? That's what we see. That's Bible. That God entrusts us. And we take care, right? We're not burying it in the ground. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we're taking what we got, okay, and we're strategic. Okay, God, yeah, okay. We're controlling. Okay, next. Okay, wait here. We're not ready for you yet. Okay, next. And that's how we do it. It's not stampede, because we'll lose control. We won't steward it. Instead of growing the seed, will be trampled by the stampede. You guys hear me? So we're called to do that. There's cattle drives for a reason. Someone has to drive them. And that's what we're doing, is that there are lost sheep and there are goats. And God is going to divide them. Not us, God's going to divide them. But we're called to start bringing them in, but we're driving that. It's not the gates wide open. We're controlling the influx so that we can sustain it, so that we grow systematically, so that we can sustain that growth. So it's not a burst and then, ooh, there's more people we can handle, and it dies. See, God is saying that we have to meet those physical needs and the spiritual ones. It says, I was a stranger and you invited me in. Understand that there's nowhere to invite people in if this dies. You understand? It's basic business. We have to keep the doors open, so we have to control that peace. And so he goes, I was in prison and you came to visit me. Understand those two things. You invited me. You came to see me. It speaks of loneliness. It speaks of bondage. The themes here in this passage are rooted in God's mercy. We see his compassion and his call to love our neighbor. It's a nudge to us to systematically show kindness, to systematically be generous to people with real needs, people who are less fortunate and vulnerable, but also to ones that feel lost and hopeless, that feel alone and trapped and desperate. Have you ever felt like that? Or is it just me? Maybe you guys are too holy for me. I don't know. Maybe you guys are like at a 10 believer. I'm more at a 2, I think. Like I need God to fill in the other 8. See, by using these real wants and needs like hunger, thirst, homelessness, a lack of clothing, illness, and imprisonment, and I know I'm going long today, guys, but God really put this on my heart, so can you give me a few more minutes? Jesus highlights all these different hardships, different issues that people deal with. And you and I have an obligation. We have a moral obligation to help and support them through these situations. And so often my heart is led towards Joshua and Madeline and their ministry. Understand that their ministry is a branch of our ministry. It's not Josh doing his own thing. There's a system. There's checks and balances. There's reporting. There's overseeing. There's headship involved. Understand that he has a budget that he has to stick to. It's not a free-for-all. There's a system in place so that we make sure that we reach people consistently. And it's not just feeding their bellies, right? Every Thursday, Joshua and Madeline and their teams, right? Like I seen CJ there. Where's Dorian? Dorian is out there. I see her there sometimes. I see the sister next to her all the time. I'm sorry, sister, I just brain farted your name. But there's certain people that when I go and I look see who's helping. I'm curious. I don't get there as often as I'd like. But I think of that ministry and the outreach to feed the homeless. But, you know, this is what he does, but it doesn't stop on the food. Like I see him pick up water every week. I see him pick up donations from stores and other ministries every week. Why? Because I'm here to help him unload. I'm here to help Joshua as best as I can. I can't be there on Thursday night, but I can help you during the week. There's this system. And it doesn't stop there at the physical need. If you go on Facebook, you can see what Joshua was doing. He shares the gospel with them. Understand that the food is not really meeting the need. The food is the bait, because there's a physical need. But the real need, the real problem, the real issue of why they're in that state is the spiritual one. So we bait them with free food on a Thursday night to bring them into a place, kind of the same way that we come in here hungry, so that you can be at a place, so that we could pour God into you, so that we could feed you with the gospel. See, we're called to make room at God's table, not just inside the church, but more importantly, outside the church. We are called to make room and meet needs, and we could do that by showing up and helping our brother on a Thursday night. Now, understand, it's not for everyone. I get it. I get it. Sometimes you may think it's not safe for kids. I understand, and I respect that choice. But if you want to be serious about helping people, if you want to be serious about reaching the homeless, if that's your heart, speak to this man. He's over that ministry. He'll get you plugged in. He'll tell you the heart. If you can't be there physically, he'll tell you other ways, because we have supplies we need. We are trying to invite people to this house for a meal. We're trying to bring people into the church. And here's the other thing, is you could just find somewhere to serve. Find somewhere to serve here. You know what the best part of this church is? We got nothing but room to grow into. The great blessing of these multiple buildings that we have is we have an opportunity and a chance to fill them. I want to invite the musicians up. See, we need to invite people to the table. Be present with them at the table, looking for opportunities, making room at the table for all. What's our mission? Love, build, reach. We need to love God and love people. We need to build this house, and we need to reach the world. And so we got to invite them to the table. There's a reason why it sounds like it's beating a dead horse. It's a constant recurring theme throughout the Bible to bring people to God. That as once we come in and we're strengthened and mature and strong enough, we bring someone else. We're to engage. We're to meet the physical and the spiritual. We bring people in where all can experience and share God's love and grace. But the church, how can we be that? How do we do that? Not just on Sunday mornings, but every single day in our own lives or here in our community, in our church. See, God has invited us to his table. How many of you feel invited this morning? God invites us all. You look around, and we're diverse just in this room. We're different. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Right? How many of you grew up singing that song in Sunday school? That mission hasn't changed. Right? And I know that's like a very simplistic way, but God is looking to call all people to him. He's an inclusive God. He doesn't like just black churches or just white churches. We weren't meant to worship him separated. We were meant to be together as one body, one church. And now we're invited to his table, and we're following the example of Jesus, and we're supposed to focus on the connection and the presence and outreach to bring other people to his table. But we need to extend invitations. We need to open our hearts. We need to be fully present during our interactions. We need to make room for everybody. We need to create space, not in here. We got enough space in here. In here. Create space in here. You got so much stuff crammed in there, not even God has room to get in there. And so make room for him. Be transformed in here by him. Start making his priorities your priorities. Be welcoming. Be loving. Show grace and mercy here at the church. Show it at home. Show it at work. Show it at the store that you shop in. Show it at the gas station you fill up in. Show it every single place that you go. Because we're at his table. We're his kids. And God has given us now the invitation. And he's told us to pass it out. Go invite people. We're the serving. Well, they didn't come. I sent out the invitations. They didn't come. Then go to the streets that no one walks down. Go to the country roads, right? I'm paraphrasing. So go and beat the bushes. See what comes out. Invite those people, right? We can invite on our own street, but most importantly, we need to invite our neighbors, our friends, our co-workers, right? I think too often we get that we get this shelter, what I call a shelter mentality, is we see the needs right here, and there are needs right here. But these aren't the only needs. More importantly, it's the needs that are connected to you. How many of your family members do not know Jesus or not living for him? How many of your co-workers desperately need God and they're not here with us today? How many people do we come across throughout the week that need Jesus? And here we are with that golden ticket, with that invitation, and we stick it in our back pocket. Church, be the church everywhere we go. Be his representative everywhere we go. Be his child everywhere we go. And invite people to the table.